They will push you, they will find your weakness, they will push you to the point where you break. And that's what I was expecting. And I didn't find it physically. I found my breaking point was.
The courtroom storm begins. The courtroom was never meant to hold a family's entire history, but on this day, it carried the weight of decades of promises, betrayals, secrets, and broken faith. There were 5 checks, 5 slips of paper, each one signed in the familiar hurried hand of Kody Brown. Each one neatly labeled Coyote Pass Project. Each one cashed. Each one gone. But none of his wives, past or present, had ever laid eyes on a dime. And now, under oath, in front of glaring lights, flashing cameras, and the sharp gaze of a judge with no time for games, Kody Brown sat at the defense table. The once proud patriarch of the sister wives' empire, the man who for years controlled his household like a kingdom, now sat reduced to something he had always sworn he would never become: a defendant. The irony was brutal. The man who built his family on the foundation of shared faith, shared love, and shared legacy was about to be undone. Not by strangers, not by outsiders, but by the very women who once promised to stand by him. And the truth? If money formed this family, it was betrayal that destroyed it. A courtroom of tension. The air inside the courtroom wasn't cold, not in temperature at least. But in tension it was frigid enough to shatter bone. Every creak of a wooden bench, every cough, every shuffle of paper echoed like a thunderclap. Christine's eyes bore into the back of Kody's head. Her stare was steady, unflinching, almost scorching. If looks could burn, he'd be nothing but ash. Robyn sat directly behind him, hands locked so tightly in her lap that her knuckles had gone pale. Her lips pressed together in a hard line, puckered as though holding back 1,000 words, or 1,000 lies. Janelle breathed deeply, outwardly calm, but beneath her serenity lay the unmistakable storm of a woman who had endured too much, calculated too much, seen too much. She had the receipts, literally and figuratively. And then there was Meri. Meri, who had once been silent, loyal, clinging to the hope that endurance would mean redemption. But now she hadn't even blinked since Kody walked through the door. Her eyes, sharp as flint, never moved. He sat there like a monument, like judgment itself. At the bench, presiding over the unraveling of this family's empire, sat the judge, a salt and pepper-haired woman whose patience had been tested by years of petty cases, excuses, and theatrics. She wasn't here to play. She wasn't here for drama. She was here for truth, and she had already seen enough lies in her career to fill an eternity. She raised her gavel. The sound echoed like a gunshot. All rise. The charges. Kody's attorney, a slick, smooth-talking young man from Flagstaff, placed a hand on his client's shoulder. "Let's go," he whispered. Kody stood. But he didn't stand like a man attending court. He stood like a man heading to battle. Because in his mind that's exactly what this was. But his battlefield wasn't Coyote Pass. It wasn't the family living room. It wasn't even TLC's cameras. Today, Kody Brown's battlefield was the truth. A reporter in the back leaned toward a colleague and whispered, "This is going to get ugly." The clerk read the charges, voice crisp and merciless. "Mr. Kody Brown, you are hereby charged with fraudulent misrepresentation, concealed financial transactions, and violation of an informal marital agreement with the plaintiffs, Meri Brown, Janelle Brown, Christine Brown, and Robyn Brown." At the mention of Robyn's name, the room shifted. She winced. Even she wasn't spared. Because on paper, Robyn Brown, his so-called soul mate, the wife he always favored, was listed as a plaintiff. And yet here she sat, behind him, beside him, against him. No one really knew anymore. Flashback. Robyn's realization 3 weeks earlier. Robyn had been alone in her Flagstaff home, holding a glass of wine. In her hands was an email from Meri. Attached were pages of bank statements, digital checks, wire transfers, all stamped with Kody's signature. All running through accounts she'd never heard of. Accounts she never even knew existed. Her lips trembled. Her eyes blurred. If he lied to them, he lied to me too. The thought struck her harder than she wanted to admit. For years she had defended him, absorbed the blows, carried his burdens. But now the documents told a story that her heart never wanted to believe. And now, here in this courtroom, that story was about to be read aloud for the world to hear. Christine takes the stand. The first to testify was Christine. Her walk to the stand was steady, calm, But her calm wasn't peace. It was fury. A fury that simmered beneath the surface, held tight, sharp enough to cut stone. "Tell us what you found out," the prosecution asked. Christine leaned into the microphone. Her voice was measured, but the undertone trembled with betrayal. "In 2022, she began, I asked to have access to the family's shared fund. The one we were all told existed. The one we were all told supported us equally." She paused, her eyes fixed on Kody. "He told me the finances were strained. That we'd have to postpone construction on my part of the property. He said there wasn't enough." The courtroom listened, breathless. Christine's next words sliced the silence in half. 3 weeks later, Robyn bought a new home. The gallery erupted in gasps. Reporters scribbled furiously. A collective murmur rolled like thunder through the room. "This isn't favoritism," the prosecutor announced. "This is fraud." The checks. The prosecutor pulled out a blown-up image board, the kind usually reserved for high-profile trials. On it were 5 checks magnified for everyone to see. All dated. All signed by Kody Brown. All cashed. But not a single one made out to Christine. Not one to Janelle. Not one to Meri. The prosecutor turned. "Where did the money go, Mr. Brown?" The judge leaned forward, her eyes sharp. "Yes, Mr. Brown. Where did the money go?" Kody shifted in his seat but said nothing. His silence roared louder than any defense. Janelle steps forward. The next witness was Janelle. She didn't shake. She didn't weep. She walked like a woman who had been preparing for this moment her entire life. "I kept spreadsheets," she began, her voice matter-of-fact, the tone of someone who lived by numbers and accountability. "Every family expense, every transaction, every promise." From her bag she pulled a black notebook, the one Kody had once mocked, rolled his eyes at, dismissed as unnecessary. "This," she said, holding it up, "is how I knew something was wrong." She flipped it open, scanning pages filled with neat handwriting and figures. "When the math didn't add up to Kody's arithmetic, I made a request to the bank. What I found were secret accounts under an LLC named Coyote Holdings." Her glare pierced through him like a blade. "You told us we were penniless. You told us there wasn't enough to go around. But you were creating something without us. Behind us. Beneath us." The courtroom hummed with whispers. Secrecy, buried under the soil of Coyote Pass, was now unearthed for all to see. And with every word, Kody's silence grew louder. Meri's turn. Finally, Meri rose. The courtroom seemed to hold its breath. She was the wife who had stayed the longest, endured the most, forgiven the unforgivable. She had been humiliated, abandoned, mocked, and still she lingered, clinging to a hope that maybe somehow she would matter again. But today her voice was not meek. It was not forgiving. It was fire. "He looked me in the eye." The courtroom was no longer silent. After Janelle's testimony shook the air, whispers spread like wildfire across the gallery. Reporters frantically scribbled notes, cameras clicked outside, and Kody shifted uncomfortably in his chair, his face twitching between arrogance and fear. The judge nodded to the bailiff, then turned back to the prosecution. "Call your next witness." And with those words, another door opened. Meri's quiet storm. Meri Brown walked to the stand with a posture that betrayed both dignity and years of heartbreak. Her steps were slow, deliberate, each one echoing across the hardwood floor like the steady ticking of a clock counting down the last moments of Kody's empire. For decades, Meri had been the silent one, the loyal one, the woman who endured neglect, betrayal, and public humiliation, all under the banner of faith and family. But today her silence would break. "Mrs. Brown," the attorney began, "how long were you married to the defendant?" Meri looked straight ahead. "Over 30 years. And during those 30 years, were you aware of the financial decisions being made on behalf of the family?" Her lips tightened. "No. Kody always said it was too complicated, that he had it under control. He told me to trust him, so I did." The attorney paused, then stepped closer. "Mrs. Brown, when did you first realize that trust had been broken?" Meri's eyes flickered toward Kody. He looked away. "It was when I discovered Robyn had her name on houses, businesses, and accounts that none of us were ever told about. I was living in a rental, struggling to make ends meet, while Robyn was signing papers for nearly $1 million home." Gasps spread through the courtroom. Meri's voice grew steadier, sharper. For years I believed I wasn't enough, that if I just tried harder he would come back to me. But now I see, it wasn't me he was abandoning. It was honesty. It was integrity. He built a separate life with separate accounts and left the rest of us to live on scraps. Kody slammed his hand on the table, but the judge quickly ordered him to remain silent. The image was clear now. Meri, the wife who had endured in silence, was finally speaking the truth in a room where Kody could not silence her. Christine's revelation: if Meri's testimony was a quiet storm, Christine's was a thunderclap. When she took the stand, her energy filled the entire room. Christine was no longer the timid wife who once begged for scraps of affection. She was the woman who had broken free, who had chosen herself, and who now had nothing left to lose by telling the truth. "Mrs. Brown," the attorney said, "what did you witness in regard to family finances?" Christine leaned forward. "I witnessed lies. I witnessed manipulation. I witnessed years of Kody telling us there wasn't enough money, while at the same time funneling cash into Robyn's separate accounts. We were told we couldn't afford Christmas gifts some years. Meanwhile, Robyn's kids were getting private school tuition, designer clothes, and trips that my children never saw." The audience erupted with murmurs. Christine's voice cracked, not with weakness but with fury. "Do you know what it feels like to look your child in the eye and tell them no, not because you didn't plan but because your husband lied? Because he chose favorites? My children grew up thinking they weren't worthy. That is the real betrayal here, not just the money but the way he destroyed their sense of worth." The camera flashes outside the courtroom intensified. Reporters could already sense the headlines writing themselves. Christine Brown exposes years of financial betrayal. Robyn under fire. The prosecution wasn't finished. "We would now like to call Robyn Brown." The room tensed. Robyn rose slowly, her face pale, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. For years she had presented herself as the soft-spoken peacemaker, the victim of jealousy, the misunderstood fourth wife. But in this room there was no script. On the stand her voice wavered. "I never asked for special treatment," she said softly. "Kody he wanted to help me. He wanted to make sure my kids had security." The attorney pressed harder. "Mrs. Brown, is it true that multiple business LLCs were created with your name as sole manager?" Robyn hesitated. "Yes, but it wasn't meant to hurt anyone." "And were you aware that the other wives had no knowledge of these accounts?" Her silence said everything. The courtroom exploded in murmurs. Even Meri shook her head in disbelief. Janelle crossed her arms tightly, while Christine glared with the fire of years of suppressed rage. Robyn's tears began to flow, but for the first time, they weren't met with sympathy. They were met with skepticism. Kody's breaking point by now, the air was suffocating with tension. The judge leaned forward, warning the courtroom to maintain order. But all eyes shifted to Kody. His mask of control was slipping. His jaw clenched, his fists tightened, and his voice finally erupted in a roar. "This is all lies. They're bitter, they're jealous, they never wanted the family to succeed." But the outburst did not have the effect he hoped. The judge's gavel slammed down. "Mr. Brown, you will remain silent or you will be held in contempt." For once, Kody had no control. The children speak. The prosecution's final move that day would be the most devastating. They called Logan Brown, the eldest child, the one who had witnessed the entire rise and fall of the family empire. Logan spoke with the calm authority of someone who had been forced to grow up too fast. "I was there when my mom struggled to pay bills. I was there when Kody told us the family couldn't afford certain things, only to watch Robyn and her kids get everything handed to them. I don't care about the money. I care about the lies. He broke trust with us, with his kids. That's something you can't repair with dollars." The gallery was silent. Tears streamed down faces even among strangers. For years fans had speculated. Today the truth was laid bare. The gavel falls. The judge adjourned for the day, but the damage had been done. Outside, reporters shouted questions, cameras flashed, and the headlines spread like wildfire. Brown family secrets exposed in courtroom showdown. Wives unite against Kody in shocking betrayal trial. Robyn's secret accounts confirmed under oath. Inside, Kody slumped in his chair, sweat dripping from his brow. The empire he built on control, secrecy, and manipulation was unraveling, piece by piece, testimony by testimony. And this was only the beginning. The courthouse doors burst open that evening. spilling reporters, camera crews, and spectators onto the steps like a tidal wave. Microphones were shoved forward, camera lights cut through the night, and the Brown family, once carefully packaged for television, was now exposed under the harshest light of all, reality. For years, viewers had watched sister wives unfold in a curated dance of family unity and faith under pressure. But the trial shattered that illusion. Every headline screamed betrayal, every interview carried shock, and every clip from the courtroom ricocheted across social media within minutes. The media circus by sunrise, the story was everywhere. CNN, Kody Brown accused of hiding secret accounts. Sister wives star faces courtroom showdown. People magazine, Meri, Janelle and Christine unite against Kody. Betrayal exposed in court. TMZ, Robyn Brown caught in financial secrets. Did she know all along? Daytime talk shows dissected every word of testimony. News anchors replayed Janelle's spreadsheets, Christine's fiery confessions, Meri's heartbreak and Robyn's stammered admissions. Clips of Kody's courtroom outburst, his voice breaking into a furious roar, were replayed endlessly, captioned with dramatic overlays. "Mr. Brown, you will remain silent." It wasn't just news anymore. It was a spectacle. Social media erupts on Twitter, hashtags exploded. Hashtag Kody exposed, hashtag justice for the wives, hashtag Robyn knew, hashtag sisterwives scandal. Instagram flooded with side-by-side comparisons. Robyn's sprawling $1 million home against the modest rentals Meri and Janelle had endured. TikTok creators spliced courtroom clips with old sister wives episodes, pointing out the hypocrisy fans had always suspected. One viral TikTok showed Kody declaring, "I've always treated all my wives equally," immediately followed by Christine's testimony of her children going without gifts while Robyn's children received private school tuition. The caption read, "The receipts don't lie." Fans who once sympathized with Robyn now turned on her. Her tears in court, once a hallmark of her persona, were mocked, with one viral post reading, "Funny how the tears show up when the accounts do." TLC in panic. Inside TLC headquarters, panic brewed. Sister wives had once been their golden goose, a reality TV empire that drew millions. But the courtroom revelations threatened not only Kody's image but the entire franchise. Executives scrambled in emergency meetings. Could the show survive this? Could it be rebranded without Kody? Or was the damage too deep? Emails leaked to the press revealed internal debates. "We cannot continue presenting him as a sympathetic figure." Christine's spin-off potential is massive. Audiences adore her freedom arc. "We need to distance from Robyn fast, her name is toxic right now." For the first time, TLC considered what once seemed unthinkable: a sister wives future without Kody Brown at the center. The family in hiding. Back in Flagstaff, the Brown family splintered. Christine retreated into the safety of her Utah home, surrounded by supportive children and fans who saw her as a survivor. Janelle leaned on her kids, especially Logan and Madison, who publicly defended her integrity. Meri, quiet as ever, released a single cryptic Instagram post. Truth has a way of finding its voice. But Robyn and Kody? They barricaded themselves in their $1 million home, blinds drawn, refusing to face the press. Paparazzi camped outside. Neighbors whispered. The fortress that once symbolized Robyn's security now looked more like a prison. The children find their voice. The true turning point came when more of the Brown children began to speak publicly. Aspen Brown wrote a long post on Instagram. "Growing up, we saw the favoritism. We felt it. Some of us struggled while others were given more. It wasn't just money, it was love, attention, and time. I'm proud of my mom for finally telling the truth. This isn't about bitterness. It's about honesty." Gwendolyn, never one to hold back, went live on TikTok. "I always knew something shady was going on. Kody was never the dad he pretended to be on TV. It was always Robyn's kids first. Always." And then came Gabriel, Janelle's son, whose quiet grief had already struck a chord with fans after Garrison's passing. He posted just 3 words on X, "How you see." The post went viral instantly, garnering millions of likes, comments, and shares. Fans connected the dots between Kody's favoritism, his neglect, and the tragic unraveling of his relationship with his children. The public verdict. While the court case was still ongoing, the court of public opinion had already reached its verdict. Kody Brown was guilty of betrayal, of favoritism, of abandoning the very family he built for fame. Talk show hosts mocked him. Memes spread like wildfire. One particularly brutal meme showed Kody holding empty pockets with the caption, "When the secret accounts aren't so secret anymore." Yet behind the jokes lay a deeper cultural moment. Viewers who once tuned in for curiosity now watched with a sense of justice being served. This wasn't just reality TV drama. It was the collapse of a patriarch, the unraveling of a system, and the long-overdue vindication of women who had been silenced for too long. The walls close in as week 2 of the trial approached. Pressure mounted on Kody and Robyn. Subpoenas for more financial documents loomed. Investigators dug into LLC filings, property records, and years of unexplained transfers. The walls were closing in. Kody, once the charismatic leader of a sprawling family, now looked like a cornered man, pale, sweaty, and stripped of the confidence that had once been his weapon. Robyn, his last loyal ally, faced mounting evidence that her innocence was anything but. The empire they built together, on faith, manipulation, and control, was crumbling brick by brick. And the world was watching. The 4th week of the trial began under heavy skies. Rain pounded against the courthouse steps as if the heavens themselves bore witness to the unraveling of a man who once called himself a leader, a husband, a father. Kody Brown entered flanked by his attorneys, but the swagger that once defined him was gone. His shoulders slumped, his eyes darted nervously, and every step seemed heavier than the last. The cameras still followed, but the narrative had shifted. This was not a man commanding attention. This was a man on the brink of ruin. The last witnesses the prosecution saved its most devastating blows for last. First came Madison Brush, Janelle's daughter. A mother now, Madison carried herself with calm resolve. Her words cut deep without needing fire. "When my husband and I struggled, my dad wasn't there. He didn't call. He didn't check on us. But I saw Robyn's kids being cared for in ways we never were. It wasn't about money, it was about love, attention, and priorities. And we weren't his priority." Then came Kody Brown, Christine's son, blunt and unflinching. "I grew up watching my mom cry herself to sleep because she wasn't enough for him. He told us family was forever, but that only applied if you were Robyn or her kids. The rest of us were disposable. That's what hurts the most." Every word from the children was like a hammer to the coffin Kody had built with his own choices. Robyn breaks on the 3rd day of testimony. Robyn was recalled to the stand. This time she was different. The carefully rehearsed tears, the soft-spoken pleas, the victimhood, it all began to collapse under the pressure of hard evidence. The prosecution displayed financial documents on a projector, wire transfers, property deeds, LC filings with Robyn's signature front and center. The attorney's voice was firm. "Mrs. Brown, can you explain why nearly $820,000 in family earnings were transferred into accounts listing only your name?" Robyn's face went white. She fumbled with tissues, her voice breaking. I didn't know it would hurt anyone. Kody told me it was the safest way. I trusted him. But I thought he was protecting me." Her sobs filled the courtroom. But this time the silence that followed wasn't sympathy. It was judgment. Even Meri, once Robyn's quiet supporter, sat stone-faced, shaking her head. Christine looked away in disgust. Janelle's jaw clenched so tight, her hand trembled as she steadied it on her lap. Robyn's breakdown was not the plea of an innocent woman. It was the unraveling of someone who realized the shield of loyalty was gone. Kody's last stand. When it was finally Kody's turn to take the stand, the room was electric. He adjusted his tie, cleared his throat, and tried to summon the charm that had once convinced millions to believe in him. But the words stumbled. His rehearsed lines fell flat. "Look," he began, his voice rising, "I built this family. I carried the weight. I made the hard choices no one else wanted to make. If I moved money, it was for the good of the family. If I favored Robyn, it was because she respected me when others didn't. This isn't betrayal, it's survival." The attorney's rebuttal was swift. "Mr. Brown, survival does not require hiding accounts. It does not require lying to your wives. It does not require abandoning your children. What you call survival, others call deception." The words hit like a gavel. The gallery, filled with reporters and spectators, began to shift visibly. Whispers of disapproval filled the air. Some shook their heads, others scribbled furiously, capturing every damning phrase. For the first time, Kody looked small. Not the patriarch, not the leader, but a man stripped bare. And then came the moment that sealed it all. The judge speaks as the testimonies closed. The judge delivered words that would echo far beyond that courtroom. This case has revealed not only financial discrepancies but the emotional and relational fractures that no contract can repair. At its core, this is not just about money. It is about broken trust, manipulation, and the misuse of authority. The court will deliberate on the evidence, but one truth is already clear. The foundation of this family has collapsed under the weight of secrecy. The gavel struck. It wasn't the final verdict yet, but it was the declaration everyone had been waiting for. Kody Brown's empire had already fallen. Outside the courthouse, the crowd outside roared with questions as the family exited. Christine walked out first, holding her head high. Reporters shouted, "Christine, how do you feel after testifying?" She simply answered, "Free." Janelle followed, her arm around her children. She didn't speak, but the smile she gave, a tired, weary smile, spoke volumes. Meri left quietly, slipping through the crowd, but her silence carried the weight of dignity. And then came Kody and Robyn. Booing erupted from the crowd. Shouts of "liar" and "shame" pierced the night. Paparazzi bulbs exploded in their faces as they pushed through, Robyn sobbing into her scarf, Kody scowling, shouting, "You don't know the truth." But the world did know. They had seen it, heard it, felt it inside that courtroom. The end of the patriarch back inside their Flagstaff home. Kody slammed the door shut, pacing furious, powerless. The man who once juggled control over 4 wives, 18 children, and millions of viewers now faced a future stripped of everything: respect, trust, even the illusion of leadership. Robyn sat at the kitchen table, head in her hands, whispering through sobs, "They all hate us now. They all hate us." And for the first time in decades, Kody had no answer. No speech. No defense. No control. The patriarch was gone. What remained was just a man, exposed, abandoned, and defeated. The 5th and final week of the trial dawned gray and quiet, as though even the world itself was holding its breath. The courthouse loomed against the winter sky, its stone walls wet with last night's rain, glistening like tears that refused to dry. Inside, the air felt heavy. Not tense in the way it had been before, when accusations flew like daggers and secrets spilled like blood. No, this was a different kind of heaviness. The kind that follows a funeral when all the fighting is done and only the grief remains. The courtroom awaits judgment. The gallery was full to bursting. Reporters, spectators, former fans of Sister Wives, and even a few faces from Flagstaff who had once defended the Browns now sat in cold curiosity. They weren't here to be entertained anymore. They were here to witness an ending. Christine entered first, her stride calm but fierce, like a woman who had already buried the worst of her pain and was ready to move on. Janelle followed, children flanking her side like armor, their presence a reminder of everything Kody had lost. Meri slipped in quietly, her silence dignified but sharp enough to cut glass. And then came Kody. His once proud steps were replaced by a slow shuffle, his tie slightly crooked, his eyes bloodshot. Beside him, Robyn clung tightly to his arm, her face swollen from nights of tears. They no longer looked like the golden couple who once sat center stage on TLC. They looked like two people drowning in a storm of their own making. The judge delivers. The bailiff called the court to order. The judge, stone-faced and deliberate, began to speak. After careful review of testimony, documentation, and financial analysis, this court finds that Mr. Kody Brown engaged in fraudulent misrepresentation, concealment of assets, and the misuse of marital agreements. The words struck like lightning. Gasps erupted from the gallery. Christine closed her eyes, a single tear sliding down her cheek. Janelle gripped Madison's hand so tightly it left marks. Meri sat utterly still as if carved from stone. The judge continued. While the criminal implications of these actions fall under separate jurisdiction, this court rules in favor of the plaintiffs. Ownership of Coyote Pass is to be divided equally among the wives. Financial restitution is to be calculated and awarded in subsequent hearings. Further, the defendant's credibility as trustee is hereby terminated. The gavel came down. It was done. Kody's collapse. The sound of the gavel seemed to echo forever, bouncing around the courtroom like the death toll of an empire. Kody's mouth opened, but no words came. His face reddened, his hands clenched the table, but the power that once made wives obey and children cower was gone. Stripped from him in front of cameras, in front of his wives, in front of the world. Robyn whispered frantically, "We'll fix this, Kody. We'll appeal. We'll make them see," but even her words fell flat. The judge had already left the bench. The audience was already filing out. Reporters rushed to the exits to blast headlines into waiting microphones. No one was listening to Robyn anymore. Outside the courthouse, the storm outside had broken. Rain poured over the courthouse steps as the family emerged one by one. Christine stepped into the downpour like a baptism, smiling through tears. When asked by reporters how she felt, her answer was simple, one word, delivered with the force of liberation: vindicated. Janelle followed, flanked by her children, her face resolute. To the cameras she said, "This was never about revenge. This was about truth. And today the truth finally won." Meri slipped through the crowd quietly but not without one final remark. "He promised us forever. What he gave us was betrayal. Now we get to write our own forever." The reporters roared, microphones extended, pens scratching furiously. But when Kody and Robyn appeared, the atmosphere shifted. Boos erupted. Shouts of "liar" and "shame" cut through the rain. Paparazzi flashes blinded them as they pushed through the crowd. Kody's jaw clenched, his voice cracking as he shouted back, "You don't know the real story. You don't know what I sacrificed." But no one cared anymore. For the first time in his life, Kody Brown was no longer the narrator of his story. He was the villain. And the world had already chosen the ending. TLC cuts the cord that evening as the storm raged on outside. TLC released a statement that spread across every major news outlet within hours. Effective immediately, TLC will not be renewing Sister Wives. The network thanks the viewers for over a decade of support and acknowledges the courage of the women who chose to share their stories. The network will be pursuing new projects with Christine, Janelle, and Meri, focusing on resilience, truth, and rebuilding after betrayal. The internet exploded. Hashtags like #TeamChristine, #JusticeForJanelle, #MeriDeservedBetter trended within hours. Memes flooded social media, portraying Kody and Robyn as the architects of their own downfall. For a man who once measured his worth by the glare of a camera, the silence of cancellation was deafening. The aftermath that night, Christine gathered with her children in Utah. They laughed through tears, ate dinner together, and raised glasses to the future. Janelle returned home, exhausted but relieved, surrounded by the love of her children who had stood by her every step. Meri sat quietly by her fireplace, journaling in silence, her heart heavy but lighter than it had been in years. And Kody? He sat alone in his study, papers scattered, whiskey glass in hand. Robyn cried in the next room, her sobs echoing down the hall. For the first time, the house that once buzzed with the chaos of plural marriage was quiet. Too quiet. The patriarch was gone. The empire was dust. And all that remained was the echo of his own lies. Epilogue. The end of an era. Weeks later, the dust had begun to settle. The women were moving on, building lives of their own, lives free from secrecy and manipulation. The children were healing, some speaking openly about the scars their father left, others choosing silence. The headlines moved on to other scandals, other stories. But for the millions who once watched Sister Wives, the image was forever burned into memory. Kody Brown standing in a courtroom stripped of everything, abandoned even by the wife who swore she'd never leave. The man who once called himself a king had become nothing more than a cautionary tale. And so the story ended. Not with love. Not with unity. Not with forever. But with betrayal, silence, and the echo of a gavel that declared to the world, Kody Brown's reign was over. The courtroom was not just a room. It was a storm. A storm of whispers, of judgment, of broken promises made flesh. Every seat was filled. Reporters scribbled, cameras hovered outside, and in the very front row sat faces once bound together by love, faith, and covenant, now torn apart by betrayal, lies, and the ache of unspoken truths. Kody Brown, once the charismatic patriarch who sold a dream of plural love to millions, now sat slumped at the defense table. His suit was pressed, his tie knotted, but no amount of tailoring could conceal the unraveling of a man who had built his empire on control, secrecy, and charm. He looked smaller, diminished, a shadow of the figure America once saw holding 4 women close in glossy TLC promos. But the wives were no longer beside him. Christine, Janelle, Meri. 3 women who had sacrificed their hearts, their bodies, their youth for his vision of family. They now sat aligned with the prosecution, not out of vengeance but out of necessity. For truth. For dignity. For survival. And today, the truth was marching forward with the weight of thunder. Christine takes the stand. The prosecutor rose. Calm, deliberate, with the kind of precision that lets silence speak louder than noise. Mrs. Brown, did you ever sign anything regarding the Coyote Pass property? Christine inhaled, her hand trembling slightly as she gripped the wood of the witness stand. Her eyes, once bright with the hope of a young bride, once soft with the patience of a mother, now carried the weight of decades. No, she answered firmly, though her voice quivered. Because Kody told us we didn't need to. He told us that we were above paperwork. That we were a family, not a business. Her lip trembled. She swallowed hard, her voice lowering. Turns out he treated the family like a business. And we were just unpaid investors. The words cracked open the silence. A murmur ran through the gallery, quick and sharp like a current. At the prosecution's table, Janelle closed her eyes, whispering a soft, pained, yes. Not in triumph but in recognition. The truth finally spoken aloud. Across the room, Robyn sat at the defense's side. Her blouse was wrinkled, her mascara stained by hours of tears. She looked down at her lap, silent, shoulders shaking as if every sob had hollowed her out. And Meri, the woman who had clung the longest, who had endured silence and rejection for years, sat stone-faced. A single tear traced her cheek, but otherwise she was carved from marble. Her silence said more than any outburst could. Because sometimes the deepest betrayal is not legal. It's not financial. Spiritual. It's when a person makes you question what love even means. When loyalty feels like a trick. When family feels like a lie. Christine's last words to Kody. The prosecutor leaned in, lowering his tone. If you could tell Mr. Brown anything right now, what would you say? The courtroom stilled. Christine's hands tightened around the wood. Slowly she turned her head, her eyes locking with Kody's. Her voice came low, steady, and filled with grief that had calcified into truth. I'd tell him this. You didn't just destroy our marriage. You destroyed our legacy. And for what? A piece of land you couldn't share? The words cut through the courtroom like a blade through glass. Kody gasped, sharp, guttural, as if the air had been knocked from his lungs. His attorney leaned in, whispering frantically in his ear, but Kody didn't hear him. His eyes were locked on Christine, wide, wounded, unable to form words. The judge, expression heavy with weariness, finally announced, "This court will recess until after lunch." Chairs scraped, murmurs filled the air, the room emptied. But Kody didn't move. He sat frozen, pale, staring at the wood grain of the table as though it might swallow him whole. But the prosecution wasn't finished. They had one final card to play before the day closed. The aunt's deposition. When the courtroom reassembled, the prosecution wheeled out a monitor. The lights dimmed. Because of illness, the lawyer announced, our next witness could not be here in person. But her testimony is essential. The screen flickered to life. And there she was, an older woman lying in a hospice bed. Gasps rippled through the room. Few recognized her face, but the weight of her presence was immediate. She was introduced as Kody's aunt. A relative rarely seen, a woman who had once managed some of the family's finances in the early years. Her voice was weak, but her words, razor-sharp. Kody always wanted to be the man on top, she rasped, each syllable cutting the air. Even as a boy, he used charm to cover his tracks. He used God when it was convenient. He used his mother when it wasn't. She coughed, then continued, eyes glistening under the sterile lights of her room. When he told me he was opening a financial trust for his wives, I cautioned him. I told him, don't confuse emotion with property. Don't confuse marriage with ownership. She paused. Her breath shallow. But Kody told me, Auntie, I've got it covered. The room was silent. Every eye fixed on the screen. She swallowed, tears slipping down her cheeks. He always promised to divide it equitably. But he never put it in writing. And the last time I asked him, a year ago, he said, I changed my mind. They didn't earn it. The words struck like a hammer. A collective gasp echoed through the courtroom. Even the judge's eyes narrowed, jaw tightening. You can forge signatures. You can move money through shell companies. But you cannot silence a dying woman who has nothing left to lose. The video ended abruptly, her frail face fading into black. Let the record show, the judge declared, his voice heavier than stone, that this deposition is entered into evidence as primary testimony. Kody's face was crimson, his body trembling. His lawyer leapt up, objecting, claiming the aunt's illness made her testimony unreliable. But the judge shook his head firmly. No. Her mind was uncomfortably clear. The ruling landed like a gavel strike before the gavel itself fell. The defense calls Robyn. Kody leaned toward his lawyer, whispering harshly, his lips pale and trembling. The attorney shook his head, but after a pause he rose and faced the bench. Your Honor, the defense will now call our first witness. Mr. Brown's defense is one of intent, not method. We ask the court to consider his character, to understand this was not fraud, but family miscommunication. To that end, our first witness is Robyn Brown. Gasps tore through the gallery. Christine's face twisted with disbelief. Janelle's arms folded across her chest, jaw tight. Meri. Meri simply mouthed one word. No. Robyn walked slowly to the stand. Her hands trembled. Her face was pale, streaked with tears. She looked at Kody once, then quickly turned away as if the sight of him was too heavy to bear. The defense attorney began softly, almost coaxing. Mrs. Brown, in your estimation, did Mr. Brown ever knowingly scheme against his wives? Robyn's lips parted, her voice trembling. No, she whispered. I don't believe he intended to mislead. Kody straightened, relief flashing briefly across his face. But then Robyn's voice cracked, breaking the illusion. But he permitted it to happen. He knew they didn't have the whole picture. And he let it go on. The room froze. The attorney pressed. Is that fraud? Robyn shook her head violently. I'm not a lawyer. Her voice faltered and then steadied with bitter truth. But it's betrayal. And that's worse in some ways. The morning air outside the Flagstaff courthouse carried a brittle chill, a reminder that even the desert could not warm the cold truth about to be exposed. Reporters clustered like vultures, cameras swiveling, microphones extended toward the front doors. It was 8:43 a.m., precisely 17 minutes before session was to begin, yet the energy was already fraying nerves and expectations. The crowd was a mosaic of the curious, the outraged, the loyalists, and the silent believers who had once hung on every carefully curated episode of Sister Wives. Inside, the courtroom itself felt smaller than it appeared on television. Polished wood glinted under fluorescent lights, and the air smelled faintly of coffee, paper, and fear. Kody Brown sat in his seat, the same seat he had occupied when the first whispers of financial mismanagement began to circulate. But today he was not the confident patriarch of a sprawling, meticulously controlled family empire. Today he looked like a man who had misplaced not just his power but the very belief system that had sustained him for decades. His suit hung a little loose, the lines of his chest no longer square and commanding but sagging under the weight of inevitability. He stared blankly at the center of the room, past the polished walnut lectern, past the polished faces of the gallery. His gaze landed on the witness stand, the very place where Christine, Janelle, Meri, and Robyn would eventually speak their truths. Truths that would dismantle him layer by layer. No one spoke. The silence stretched, heavy and oppressive, like the calm before a storm. Kody's lawyer whispered something into his ear, a flurry of urgent advice, but Kody did not register the words. He was already elsewhere, lost in a spiral of regret, panic, and disbelief. The judge entered with the slow, deliberate grace of someone who understood the power of a first impression. Her dark robe swished across the floor like a shadow unfurling, her expression carved from granite. The room collectively inhaled. She did not look at Kody, at the wives, or at the reporters. She looked at the law itself as if it were a living, breathing entity capable of both judgment and mercy. But not today. This court has perused all documents, testimonies, and evidence presented, she began, voice measured, almost too calm, yet weighted with the authority of inevitability. The issue before this bench is not one of morality alone. While moral considerations inform the context, today's ruling hinges on intent, accountability, and consequence. Kody's hands gripped the arms of his chair. He felt sweat bead at his hairline, a sticky betrayal of his internal collapse. He swallowed, but no sound emerged. The plaintiff's side sat in a quiet, almost imperceptible solidarity. Christine's posture was regal yet restrained, her eyes betraying both fire and exhaustion. Janelle's shoulders sagged in a way that suggested decades of invisible burden, now lifted slightly by the certainty that truth had arrived. Meri, quiet but resolute, stared at the table in front of her, mentally cataloging every transaction, every misappropriated cent. Robyn sat alone in the middle row, neutral in expression, but her presence a puzzle, a ghost in the narrative of betrayal. The judge began to enumerate the charges. Each word landed like a hammer strike. Mr. Kody Brown is hereby found legally liable for the following civil offenses: breach of verbal contract, intentional misrepresentation of assets, and the misuse of jointly accrued funds under false pretenses. A barely audible gasp escaped Meri's lips. Christine's expression remained tight, as though she was bracing herself for what she already knew was coming. Janelle exhaled slowly, her lungs releasing the weight of years spent balancing spreadsheets, promises, and betrayal. The judge's voice continued, deliberate and unrelenting. Restitution in the sum of $1,868,000 is to be paid to the plaintiffs, split equally along with attorney fees. Further, I am recommending this case for criminal prosecution by the state attorney's office. The financial documentation presented here constitutes sufficient grounds for potential charges of fraud and identity abuse. Kody's knuckles whitened as he gripped the arms of his chair. Panic was no longer subtle. It was sharp, palpable, and dangerous. His attorney leaned in, murmuring rapid-fire instructions, but Kody did not move. He had realized with a sinking finality that no one was going to speak for him. No one was going to save him. The empire he had built on faith, trust, and carefully staged illusion was crumbling, and the sound it made was silence. The judge paused, her eyes sweeping the room. Before we recess, the plaintiffs may make closing statements on the record. You have permission. Christine rose first. She walked forward, each step deliberate, each movement commanding. She did not approach this as a courtroom spectacle. She approached it as a reclamation of self, of years stolen, of trust betrayed. I did not come here to tear down Kody, she began, voice calm, resonant, carrying a weight that silenced the murmurs. I came here to end the pretending. We created something together. A family, a vision, but only one of us was allowed to profit from it. To all the women watching, wives, mothers, sisters, you do not owe silence to those who shattered your trust. Her words hung like thunder, filling the room with an energy that was almost sacred. Kody's eyes flickered, and for a moment he seemed smaller, diminished by the force of her truth. Janelle followed. Her tone was quieter, softer, but every word cut deep. I believed in the system we created. I planned, I organized, I kept everything tidy because I thought truth arose from order. But betrayal doesn't follow spreadsheets. It comes dressed as charm, smiles, and authority, and it destroys the soul before it is ever exposed. Meri stood last. She did not cry, did not plead. She delivered her truth with quiet devastation, precise and unwavering. This isn't the first time Kody has lied to me, she said, turning her gaze directly to him. But it is the first time I have stopped waiting for him to love me enough to tell the truth. I was never a backup. I was convenient. And I see that now. Kody's face drained of color. He tried to speak, his voice quivering, cracking under the weight of realization. You all hate me now, and perhaps I do, he murmured. But I didn't start by trying to hurt anyone. I struggled. I panicked. I tried to hold on to something I never truly understood, and I defended what remained. And yes, I loved you in my own way. I'm sorry that wasn't enough. The judge's gavel struck. Silence engulfed the room again. Kody's words had offered no comfort, no defense. Only the echo of a man confronting the inevitability of his own collapse. Outside, reporters swarmed, flashes illuminating faces, but the wives slipped away in quiet dignity. Robyn was a shadow, moving under an umbrella, her face unreadable, her narrative unresolved. Christine raised the court document like a flag of survival. Janelle finally allowed herself the faintest smile, a release of decades-long tension. Meri's quiet determination remained her signature as she stepped away into the waiting cameras, unseen but unstoppable. Even as the civil verdict sank in,